Welcome to Squirrelly Ones Part 2, Enacting the Plan. I am Annie Barley Givler, and welcome back. When we last met, we were discussing squirrels in your lives, squirrely kids, and we kind of left off where we were talking about a character development plan or curriculum that's individualized to a particular squirrel. We talked about shifting our own perception of kids that don't quite fit the mold in terms of their behavior, from a kid is being willfully defiant or refusing to follow directions, and we instead adopt the philosophy of kids will do well if they can, and if they're not doing well, it's because they don't have the skills necessary to perform in the way that you want them to. In taking on this responsibility, this massive, epic responsibility of teaching not just an instrument, but also character skills necessary to learn that instrument and also to be successful in life, we are using the language around the 24 character strengths and virtues, and we have assessed our students so that we know where their areas of growth are. Throughout this process, it's really important to be open in communicating with the family and the student themselves, because this language is going to become part of their life, not just in their musical realm, but also at school and at home. And these are things that we're working on across the board and not just isolated to the violin experience. So when we're seeing maladapted behaviors, it can look like a whole bunch of different things. It can look like a shutdown. It can look like a refusal to do what you're asking. It can look like a temper tantrum. It can look like frustration. It can look like just defiance. And regardless of what it looks like, it's usually stemming from a couple different things. If you want to be all behavioral scientist-y about it, I would say that demands that exceed the capacity of a student to respond adaptively equals maladapted behaviors. In normal people language, that's like if you're asking a kid to do something that they don't perceive themselves to be able to do or to do to your standard, they're going to freak out in some way. Positive narration is a crucial element of implementing a character development plan with any squirrely student. It allows them to hear the language surrounding the strengths that you're trying to cultivate in them, and it also makes them feel good about following directions, not just the product that they're achieving on their instrument. Wow, look at that self-control that you're using to take your violin out so carefully. And I really appreciate your grit right now, because I know that you're tired and you've had a long day at school, but you're practicing anyway, and I'm really proud of your character right now. Another huge component to implementing the character plan that you've developed for your student or your child is teaching them to be a self-advocate. And this is a huge piece of working with a squirrely one and developing their character. You want them to be able to advocate for themselves in situations where they don't feel they can demonstrate the desired behavior. Imagine how empowering that is as a kid who has historically struggled in school or in violin or in any realm, to all of a sudden have tools available to you to say, you know what, I would do much better if you could just repeat those directions again, or can I please just have a break to get myself together? I have had students as young as 4 years old say this type of thing to me in lessons, and I've also gotten to watch my own child access this toolkit time and time again. With these tools come a confidence and ownership of their own learning process, and it's really an amazing thing to watch. These squirrely friends can now easily sidestep obstacles that once would have derailed them completely. So self-regulation cards are a great way to teach beginning self-advocacy to even the smallest squirrel out there. I've seen these cards work with 3-year-olds. The idea is that the student is given a deck of cards, and on each of the cards is a specific strategy or tool that they have available to them during their lesson or during their group or during their home practice session. I first made my first deck of cards for this particular squirrel right here. His name is Eamon. He's now 7 and no longer uses these cards when we practice at home. But they were a total eye-opener for both of us when I thought of the idea originally. Our first deck of practice cards included a water card, so if he was feeling frustrated or just needed a break, he could get a drink of water. He had a break card that he could use. I think originally it was 5 minutes, and then we sort of reduced it gradually to 2 minutes. He also had in his deck a pass card or a skip card, which he could use on a day he was feeling really frustrated and just didn't want to do the hardest thing on his list, or skip a review song that day, whatever the spirit was. We had a silly card in Eamon's deck for sure. When he felt like he had used up all of his focus that he had available to him, he would play a review song in the silliest way possible, and that was always a favorite of his. We also had a coffee card, which I appreciated greatly as his parent, but also it gave him an opportunity to do something, to work on something really hard and challenging without mom looking over his shoulder. So the idea was that mom would go get a cup of coffee, or depending on the time of day, a glass of wine, and leave him alone to practice for a few minutes on his own. We had a bow hold card, which actually meant I'm not allowed to say anything about his bow hold because he's really focused on something else at the moment. Similarly, we had an elbow card. I'm not allowed to tell him he needs to think about his elbow. He had a help card, which actually came in super handy in the moments where we are disagreeing about what's supposed to be done. And so we would phone our teacher, or we would text our teacher, or we would make a video and send it to our teacher so that she could help us figure out the dispute without all of the actual conflict. And last but not least, Eamon's favorite card in the bunch, Mom is not allowed to say anything. The goal of these cards was to teach Eamon self-advocacy. How empowering for him to be in charge of his own behavior and be in control of the situation so that he could be successful. And of course, we incentivized not using all of the cards unless you really needed to. But at the end of the day, he could get through a practice session using no cards after a few months because he had empowered himself to just advocate for what he needed to be successful. We're also going to use our character development plan to inform our group class teaching of the whole group and also designing our home practice sessions. We want to make sure that our strengths, our 24 character strengths, are front and center in our brain as we're designing the plan for the day, not just what musical content we want to make sure we cover. Class lesson plan or our daily practice menu at home should include the following: gross motor skills, which are meant to highlight self-regulation, social intelligence, zest, maybe dance a minuet, nitpicky activities, detailed work. This highlights love of learning, perseverance, judgment, appreciation of beauty and excellence. We should include a playthrough activity where we're highlighting perseverance and also appreciation of beauty and excellence. We should have a performance activity as part of our practice or group lesson each week, highlighting bravery, highlighting appreciation again. We should have a time to learn new stuff, obviously. Bravery, curiosity, love of learning. We should also highlight a creative activity. Use the other side of the brain. Get some humor in there. We should also incorporate activities, especially in group classes, where we're changing the student's perspective, changing their leadership role within the group. In designing my own group class lesson plans, I'm going to make sure that not only am I incorporating all of these character strengths into my lesson, but also they're hearing me say all of the different 24 strengths every class. My students need to come away from their cello experience knowing that I value their character and the development of that character just as much, if not more, than their cello playing. I hope this has been somewhat helpful to you in thinking about how best to work with your squirreliest little friends. At the end of the day, it's a really amazing gift to work with all kids, even the squirrely ones. And the squirrely ones in particular make us all better people in the process. Shoot me an email. Thanks.